What happens when a Hollywood legend walks onto a morning show set expecting a friendly chat about his incredible career, only to find himself defending his entire legacy against unexpected accusations? The tension that unfolded between Dick Van Dyke and Michael Strahan became one of the most uncomfortable moments in morning television history. And what started as a simple interview about his latest projects quickly spiraled into something nobody saw coming. Before we get into what happened, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling us your thoughts on this entire situation. The interview started innocently enough. Dick Van Dyke, looking as spry and energetic as ever at his age, walked onto the Good Morning America set with that famous smile plastered across his face. The audience gave him a warm round of applause, and Michael Strahan stood up to greet him with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "Dick Van Dyke, welcome back to Good Morning America," Michael said, shaking his hand firmly. "It is always an absolute pleasure to have you here." "Michael, thank you so much for having me," Dick responded, settling into his chair. "I always enjoy coming on the show. You folks treat me well." "Well, we have a lot to talk about today," Michael continued, glancing down at his notes. "You have been in the business for, what, over 7 decades now. That is absolutely remarkable." "Something like that, yes," Dick chuckled. "I stopped counting after a while. When you love what you do, the years just fly by." Michael nodded, but there was something in his expression that seemed different from his usual warm demeanor. "You know, your career has spanned so many different eras of entertainment. From the golden age of television to modern Hollywood, that gives you a unique perspective on how things have changed." "Oh, absolutely," Dick agreed. "The industry is completely different now than when I started. Technology, content, the way people consume entertainment, it has all transformed." "And what about representation?" Michael asked, his tone shifting slightly. "Would you say things have gotten better in that department?" Dick seemed slightly caught off guard by the question, but maintained his composure. "Well, certainly there is more diversity on screen now than there was back then. I think that is a positive development for everyone." "More diversity, yes," Michael said, leaning forward slightly. "But let me ask you something, Dick. Looking back at your own career, do you ever reflect on some of the choices you made, specifically regarding roles that maybe were not yours to play?" The smile on Dick's face faltered for just a moment. "I am not sure I follow what you mean, Michael." "Mary Poppins," Michael said directly. "Your role as Bert. The character was written as a British chimney sweep, and you played him with that now famous, or some might say infamous, Cockney accent." Dick's expression tightened. "Michael, I did my best with that accent. I worked with a dialect coach, I studied the language. Was it perfect? No, I have admitted that many times over the years, but I gave it my honest effort." "But that is not really what I am asking about," Michael pressed. "What I am curious about is whether you ever stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, that role should have gone to an actual British actor who could have done the accent authentically." The audience, which had been cheerfully engaged moments earlier, grew noticeably quieter. Dick shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Michael, with all due respect, that was a different time," Dick said, his voice still measured but with an edge creeping in. "Casting decisions were made by the studio, by Walt Disney himself. I was offered a role, and I took it. That is how the business worked." "Right, but you had agency," Michael countered. "You could have said no. You could have suggested they find someone more appropriate for the role. Instead, you took it and delivered an accent that British people have been mocking for 60 years. Dick's jaw clenched. "Now hold on just a minute. Are you seriously sitting here, on national television, criticizing me for accepting a role in one of the most beloved films ever made? A film that has brought joy to millions of families for generations. I am asking you to reflect on the impact of that choice," Michael said, not backing down. "Because while it may have brought joy to millions, it also set a precedent. It told the industry that authenticity did not matter, that anyone could play anything regardless of whether they were right for it. That is completely absurd." Dick shot back, his legendary composure finally starting to crack. "I was an actor doing my job. Should we go back and erase every performance where someone played outside their exact background? Should we cancel every historical drama where Americans play Europeans, or vice versa? Where does this line of thinking end?" "It ends with accountability," Michael responded firmly. "It ends with acknowledging when we have made mistakes and learning from them. The film industry has a long history of taking roles away from the people who should have played them and giving them too big names for commercial reasons, and you think I personally am responsible for that entire systemic issue?" Dick asked, his voice rising slightly. "I was one actor, trying to make a living and create art. I did not control Hollywood's power structures, but you benefited from them," Michael said. "That is the point, Dick. You benefited from a system that prioritized your name and your fame over authenticity and fair representation." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Crew members exchanged glances, and the producers behind the cameras looked increasingly nervous about where this was heading. "I have spent my entire career trying to bring happiness to people," Dick said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. I have worked with people from all backgrounds, all walks of life. I have tried to be a good person, a good colleague, a good artist. And you are sitting here trying to tear that down over a decision made 60 years ago by people who are not even here to defend themselves. I am not trying to tear anything down, Michael insisted. I am trying to have an honest conversation about the entertainment industry and the choices that have shaped it. These conversations are important, even when they are uncomfortable. Debated by who exactly? Dick asked, his tone becoming sharper. By people who love the movie, by people who grew up watching it and sharing it with their children, or by critics who need something to complain about decades later because they have run out of actual problems to address. Michael did not flinch. By people who care about representation in media, by British actors who have talked about how frustrating it is to see their stories told by Americans who do not understand the culture, by people who work in this industry and want to see it do better. Better, Dick repeated, almost laughing but without any humor. You want to know what better looks like, Michael? Better looks like an industry where a kid from Danville, Illinois, can work hard, develop his craft, and eventually get a shot at playing a role in a major motion picture. That is the American dream. That is what I lived. But whose dream gets deferred so yours can come true? Michael shot back. That is what this conversation is really about. For every role you took, that was one less opportunity for someone else. Someone who might have needed it more. Someone who could have brought authenticity to it. Dick leaned forward, his eyes intense. You're acting like I stole something. I auditioned, Michael. I was chosen. Walt Disney wanted me for that role. Are you suggesting I should have turned down Walt Disney? That I should have walked away from one of the biggest opportunities of my career out of some sense of guilt that I was not British enough? I am suggesting that maybe the system itself was flawed, Michael said. And maybe people who benefited from that flawed system have a responsibility to acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. Dick's voice was rising again. What exactly do you want me to say, Michael? Do you want me to apologize for having a career? Do you want me to apologize for working hard and succeeding? Because I will not do that. I will not apologize for my life's work. Nobody is asking you to apologize for your career, Michael clarified. But you could acknowledge that some of the opportunities you had came at the expense of others who deserved a fair shot. Deserved, Dick said, shaking his head. You keep using that word like there is some cosmic scoreboard determining who deserves what. I worked for everything I got. I started in radio, did theater, practiced my craft for years before I ever got a break. Nobody handed me anything. Except you were handed roles that should have gone to other people, Michael countered. That is a form of privilege, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. The word privilege seemed to strike a nerve. Dick's face reddened slightly, and he sat up even straighter in his chair. Privilege. Let me tell you about privilege. Michael, I grew up during the Depression. My family struggled. I worked odd jobs while trying to break into entertainment. I faced rejection after rejection. That does not sound like privilege to me. Personal hardship does not negate systemic advantage, Michael responded. You can have struggled and still have benefited from being in the right demographic at the right time. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. So now my entire career is reduced to demographics, Dick asked incredulously. Everything I accomplished, every performance I gave, every person I entertained, none of that matters because you have decided I had some invisible advantage. It matters, Michael said, but it exists in a context. And that context includes the fact that opportunities were not distributed fairly. They still are not, but they were even worse back then. Dick took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain his composure. Michael, I have always tried to be a good person. I have supported causes. I have worked with diverse casts. I have used whatever platform I had to try to make the world a little bit better. What more do you want from me? I want you to be honest about your career, Michael said, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the moments where maybe things could have been done differently. That is all. Honest. Dick's laugh was bitter now. You want honesty? Fine. Here is my honesty. I am proud of Mary Poppins. I am proud of the work I did. I am proud of the joy that film has brought to people all over the world. And I refuse to feel guilty about it just because you think I should. Even knowing that British actors have criticized that performance for decades. Michael pressed, even knowing that it has become a running joke about bad accents. So it is not perfect, Dick admitted. I have said that myself many times. But you know what? I tried. I gave it my best effort. And the film succeeded despite my imperfect accent. Maybe, just maybe, that is because there was more to my performance than just the way I said my words. I am not denying your talent, Michael said, but talent does not excuse everything. Talented people can still make choices that have negative impacts. Negative impacts, Dick repeated. You make it sound like I hurt someone, like I did something wrong. I played a character in a movie, Michael, that is all. I did not steal anything. I did not harm anyone. I acted, but you took an opportunity that could have elevated a British actor's career, Michael said. You took a role that could have been a breakthrough moment for someone else. Does that not matter to you at all? Dick's patience was clearly wearing thin. What matters to me is that I did my job to the best of my ability. What matters to me is that I showed up every day and gave everything I had to that role. What matters to me is that Julie Andrews, my co-star, who actually was British, never had a problem with my casting. In fact, we became great friends. Does her opinion not count? One person's comfort does not make something okay. Michael responded. Plenty of people have spoken out about these issues over the years. Just because one person was fine with it does not mean everyone was. So we should go with the critics over the people who were actually there. Dick asked. We should listen to people who have grievances over the people who actually worked on the film and were happy with it. We should listen to everyone, Michael said. And we should be willing to admit when things could have been done better. That is called growth, Dick. That is called progress. Progress. Dick said the word like it tasted bad. You know what I think? I think this is not about progress at all. I think this is about tearing down people who have had successful careers because it makes for good television. I think this is about creating controversy where none needs to exist. Or maybe, Michael said, his voice steady. This is about finally having conversations that should have been had a long time ago. Conversations about who gets systems I benefit from, Dick said, his voice dripping with frustration. You keep coming back to that. But let me ask you something, Michael. Where were these conversations when I was being celebrated? Where were these questions when I won awards? When I was honored for my contributions to entertainment? Why is it that now, at my age, after everything I have accomplished, suddenly I am supposed to feel bad about it? Because society evolves, Michael answered. Because we understand things now that we did not understand then. Because we have language and frameworks for discussing these issues that did not exist in the 60s. That is how progress works. Progress, Dick scoffed. You keep using that word. But what you are describing does not feel like progress to me. It feels like revisionist history. It feels like taking everything I worked for and putting an asterisk next to it. If the asterisk is accurate, then maybe it belongs there, Michael said, and the audience gasped audibly at the directness of his statement. Dick's face went through a range of emotions, from shock to anger to something that looked almost like hurt. You really believe that, don't you? You actually think my career deserves an asterisk? I think every career should be examined in its full context. Michael replied, the good and the bad. Nobody is perfect, Dick. Nobody's career is without flaws. All I am asking is that you acknowledge that. Acknowledge what specifically? Dick demanded. Spell it out for me. Michael, what exactly do you want me to say on national television? What words do you want to come out of my mouth? Michael paused for a moment, seemingly considering his response carefully. I want you to say that you understand why some people have issues with your casting in Mary Poppins. I want you to acknowledge that while you did your best, it was not necessarily the best choice for the role. I want you to recognize that opportunities were not distributed fairly in that era, and that you benefited from that unfairness. And if I don't agree with your assessment, Dick asked, if I think you are completely wrong about all of this, then what? Then we disagree, Michael said with a shrug. But at least we will have had the conversation. At least the audience will have heard different perspectives. Different perspectives, Dick repeated. Is that what this is? Because it feels a lot like you brought me here to lecture me. It feels like you had an agenda coming into this interview, and my job was to sit here and take it. My agenda is honest conversation, Michael insisted. My agenda is not letting nostalgia blind us to legitimate criticisms. My agenda is making sure that as we celebrate people's careers, we are also honest about the full picture. The full picture, Dick said, his voice rising again. Let me paint you the full picture. Michael, the full picture is that I spent my entire career trying to make people happy. I danced, I sang, I did comedy, I took risks. I worked with everyone from Walt Disney to Carl Reiner. I created television that families could watch together. I made movies that have stood the test of time. That is the full picture. And part of that picture is that you took roles that could have gone to other people, Michael said, refusing to back down. That is also true. Both things can be true at the same time. But you are only interested in talking about one of them, Dick countered. You are not interested in celebrating anything I did. You are only interested in criticism. That is not fair, Michael protested. I started this interview by acknowledging your incredible career, your 7 decades in entertainment. You started this interview by setting me up, Dick shot back. You buttered me up with compliments so you could spring this trap on me. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. The tension had reached a breaking point. Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. It is not a trap to ask someone to reflect on their career choices. Dick, it is not a trap to have a conversation about representation and opportunity. It is a trap when you bring someone on under false pretenses. Dick said, your producers told my team this would be a friendly interview about my current projects. Nobody said anything about putting my entire legacy on trial. We discuss current issues on this show, Michael said, and representation in Hollywood is a current issue. It always has been, but people are finally talking about it openly. That makes it relevant to any conversation about entertainment history. so I am just a convenient target. Dick asked, just an easy example you can point to and say, see, look at what was wrong with the old days. You are not a target, Michael insisted. You are a participant in a larger conversation. A conversation that is bigger than you, bigger than me, bigger than any one person. Except you chose to make it about me. Dick said, you chose to bring me here and put me in this position. You could have had this conversation with anyone, but you chose me. Because your career is illustrative of these issues, Michael explained. Because Mary Poppins is a cultural touchstone that everyone knows. Because your experience in the industry spans so many decades that it provides valuable perspective. Valuable perspective. Dick laughed without humor. What you mean is I am old enough that you figured I would not push back. You figured I would just nod along and agree with whatever you said because that is what people expect from someone my age. That is not true, Michael said. But there was a flicker of something in his expression. Is it not? Dick pressed. Because it seems to me like you miscalculated. You thought you could bring on a beloved entertainer, ask him some pointed questions, and he would just smile and take it because that is his brand. Well, I am sorry to disappoint you, Michael, but I am not going to do that. I am not disappointed, Michael said. If anything, this conversation is more valuable because you are engaging with it rather than just accepting the premise. Valuable, Dick repeated. Everything is valuable to you as long as it creates drama for your show. You do not actually care about representation or opportunity. You care about ratings. That is not fair, Michael said, and for the first time, he looked genuinely offended. I care deeply about these issues. I have spoken about them many times on this program and others. This is not about ratings. Then what is it about? Dick demanded, because from where I am sitting, it looks like you decided to make a name for yourself by taking down an old man who cannot defend himself properly. You are defending yourself just fine, Michael observed. In fact, you are proving that you are more than capable of holding your own in this conversation. Because I have to, Dick said. Because you left me no choice, you backed me into a corner where I either accept your version of my career or I fight back. Those were my only options. Or you could have engaged thoughtfully with the questions, Michael suggested. You could have said, yes, I understand those concerns. Here is how I think about them. That was always an option. Why would I validate concerns? I am not asking you to condemn yourself, Michael said, his voice firm. I am asking you to acknowledge reality. There is a difference. Your version of reality, Dick corrected. Your interpretation of events that happened 60 years ago. Filtered through modern sensibilities and standards that did not exist at the time. That is what you are asking me to accept. Standards evolve. Dick. Morality evolves. What was acceptable then might not be acceptable now. That is just how civilization works. So we should judge everyone in history by today's standards. Dick asked, should we go back and condemn everyone who failed to live up to values that had not been invented yet? Where does it end, Michael? It ends with honesty. Michael replied, it ends with being able to look back and say, we did things differently then, and some of those things were wrong. That is not condemning anyone. That is just being truthful. But you are condemning me, Dick insisted. Maybe you are dressing it up in fancy language about context and evolution. But at the end of the day, you brought me here to tell me I did something wrong. That is condemnation, no matter how you package it. Michael shook his head. I brought you here to have a conversation. If you feel condemned, that is coming from inside you, not from me. That is a cheap therapist trick, Dick snapped, turning it around on me like I am the problem for feeling attacked when you are the one attacking me. I am asking questions, Michael maintained. Tough questions, sure. Uncomfortable questions, absolutely. But questions are not attacks. They are when they are designed to make someone look bad, Dick said. And that is exactly what this is. You crafted these questions specifically to put me in an impossible position. If I agree with you, I am admitting wrongdoing. If I disagree with you, I look defensive and out of touch. Either way, you win. This is not about winning, Michael said, but his tone suggested he was growing tired of the back and forth. Is it not? Dick challenged. Because you seem pretty determined to get me to say what you want me to say. You keep pushing and pushing, trying to wear me down until I give you the soundbite you want for your promotional clips. I want you to engage genuinely with important issues, Michael countered. Issues that affect real people in this industry right now. Issues that will not go away just because they make you uncomfortable. You know what makes me uncomfortable, Michael? Dick leaned forward intensely. Being used. Being brought onto a show under false pretenses so you can ambush me with gotcha questions. Being treated like a villain when I have spent my entire life trying to bring joy to people. That is what makes me uncomfortable. Nobody called you a villain, Michael pointed out. You are the one using that word. Because that is how you are treating me, Dick said. Like I did something terrible that needs to be atoned for. Like my career is something shameful that needs to be apologized for. Your career is legendary, Michael said. But legendary does not mean flawless. It does not mean above criticism. Everyone's work can be examined and discussed. That includes yours. Examined and discussed, Dick echoed. Those are nice words for what you are doing. But let me be clear, Michael, I am not going to sit here and let you rewrite my history. I am not going to pretend that everything I accomplished was somehow tainted or problematic. I worked hard, I earned my success, and I am proud of it. And nobody is taking that away from you, Michael said, spreading his hands. You can be proud of your work and still acknowledge its context. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Except you keep trying to make them mutually exclusive, Dick argued. You keep implying that my pride is misplaced, that I should temper it with guilt or shame or whatever emotion you think I should be feeling. I think you should be feeling thoughtful, Michael said. I think you should be willing to consider perspectives beyond your own. Is that really too much to ask? When those perspectives are wrong, yes, Dick stated flatly. When those perspectives are based on applying modern standards retroactively to a different era, yes. When those perspectives ignore everything I actually contributed in favor of focusing on one imperfect accent in one movie, yes, that is too much to ask. Michael took a deep breath. So you will not even consider that maybe, just maybe, there is some validity to the concerns people have raised about representation in your era of Hollywood. I will consider it, Dick said. I have considered it, and here is my conclusion. People are looking for problems where none exist. They are inventing controversies because it makes them feel morally superior to find fault with the past. That is what this is really about. Or maybe, Michael said slowly, people are finally feeling empowered to speak up about things that bothered them all along. Maybe these concerns were always there, but people did not have the platform or the language to express them. Did that occur to you? If these concerns were so valid, why did Mary Poppins become one of the most beloved films of all time? Dick challenged. Why did audiences embrace it? Why has it endured for 6 decades? If my casting was so problematic, why did nobody seem to care at the time? People did care, Michael corrected. British critics mentioned your accent. It was discussed. But in that era, those discussions did not gain the same traction they would today. That does not mean the concerns were invalid. So a few critics complained, and that means I should feel bad about one of my greatest achievements. Dick asked incredulously. That is your argument. My argument is that criticism is not the enemy, Michael said. My argument is that we can love something and still acknowledge its flaws. My argument is that you are taking this very personally, when it is really about much bigger issues. How can I not take it personally? Dick asked, his voice strained. You are sitting here questioning my career, my choices, my legacy. That is personal. Michael, that is about as personal as it gets. It is only personal if you make it personal, Michael responded. If you can step back and see this as part of a larger conversation about the entertainment industry, then it becomes less about you and more about the system. But I am part of the system, Dick said. You cannot separate me from it. So when you criticize the system, you are criticizing me. There is no way around that. Then maybe you need to be willing to accept some of that criticism, Michael suggested. Maybe that is part of being a public figure with a long career. Maybe that is part of legacy. My legacy is fine without your criticism, Dick said firmly. My legacy is built on the work I did and the joy I brought to millions of people. Your opinion does not change that. But it is not just my opinion. Michael pressed one more time. It is a conversation happening across the entire entertainment industry. You can dismiss me all you want, but you cannot dismiss everyone who shares these concerns. Dick stood up suddenly, removing his microphone. You know what, Michael? I think we are done here. I came here in good faith, and you turn this into an interrogation. I will not be part of it anymore. The studio fell into shocked silence. Michael looked stunned, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Dick, please. We still have time in the segment. You have used up all the time you are going to get from me, Dick said, his voice steady but cold. I have spent enough of my morning being lectured by someone half my age about things he was not even alive to witness. I am leaving. Dick, come on. Michael tried again, standing up himself now. Let's finish the conversation. The conversation is finished, Dick stated. You wanted honesty. Here is my honesty. This was a mistake. Coming here was a mistake. Thinking I could have a respectful dialogue about my career was a mistake. I will not make it again. And with that, Dick Van Dyke walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving Michael Strahan standing there speechless and the audience murmuring in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. So what did you think about this entire confrontation? Was Michael out of line for pushing so hard, or did Dick overreact to legitimate questions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you hit that subscribe button because we have more stories like this coming your way.